saw this massive trend where all of these physicians had to start affiliating themselves with hospitals because they couldn't keep up with the compliance requirements. So I wanted to be that hospital that the organizations were coming to saying, hey, we can't keep up with this regulation. Please help me do it.
Welcome to Now That's It, Stories of MSP Success, where we dive into the journeys of some of the trailblazers in our industry to find out how they used their passion for technology to help turn managed services into the thriving sector it is today.
He's a recognized thought leader and trusted advisor to his clients. He brings over 25 years of experience in the technology industry, including the identification and evaluation of emerging technologies. He's managed complex security and IT projects for thousands of clients in legal, healthcare, manufacturing, education, and professional services. He's the Chief Technology Officer and the Chief Strategy Officer for Focus Technology Solutions. Please welcome Mr. Bill Smeltzer. Well, thank you so very much for being here. This has been a fun couple of days, and this is exciting because you came as a presenter, but you also came as a participant. So you've been engaging over the last couple of days. Why don't you tell the group a little bit about yourself? And I know you've got to meet a lot of them last night and the last couple of days, but for those that don't know you, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've learned a lot the last few days, so I want to thank Chris and team and Rob. I think this has been phenomenal.
Yeah.
Right? You guys have done a great job.
Perfect.
I know not to play this guy in Cornwall.
Yeah.
Right. So Bill Smeltzer, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Focus Technologies. I've been there 19 years, been in the industry almost 30 years. Relevant to the context of this conversation, tried to get out in front of compliance, saw it coming in a big way, saw it in my personal life with my doctors and primary care physicians and what HIPAA did to them, which led to IT. So going a little off topic here, but if I can set the stage.
Please.
So what I saw was when HIPAA was released, all of a sudden I showed up at my primary care physician and there was a HIPAA compliance officer. And they came out and asked me to sign all these records and all this stuff. Meanwhile, we're working with a large healthcare company in Boston and they're deploying a $4 billion Epic rollout. So what's Epic? It's a electronic medical records application. And I'm saying to myself, these guys are spending $4 billion to roll out this software that by law they have to, right? They have to meet the Electronic Medical Records Act. In addition to that, I'm seeing this primary care physician that I've been going to for 30 plus years is now taking a patient exam room and turned it into a compliance office room. And this person's coming out asking me to sign forms every time I go in there. I'm like, this is, kind of seeing it grow. And the next thing, what we saw was this massive trend, and this is in the medical industry now, not me, where all of these physicians had to start affiliating themselves with hospitals because they couldn't keep up with the compliance requirements. They didn't have the $4 billion. So what they were essentially doing is they were subbing out their compliance to the hospitals. That's really what they were doing if you just break it down to nothing. So part of our strategy with Focus and kind of looking at it is said, how do we allow our clients to sub out how do we allow our clients to sub out their compliance to us? So I wanted to be that hospital that the organizations were coming to saying, hey, we can't keep up with this regulation. Please help me do it. And that was kind of the brainchild of what we're going to talk about today.
That's great. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about Focus? Boston, Mass, right? I'm not saying it right. Boston?
Yeah. So if you guys can't understand me, just ask me to repeat stuff, right? My wife has a lot of family in the Carolinas and they consider me a Kennedy at this point. So, but that being said, Focus Technology, 25 years in business. We absolutely come from the VAR background, selling product. We morph the company into services and we morph to managed services. And I think the key thing I would suggest to you is that the name, Focus Technology, we're not a risk management company. We're a technology company. And I'm going to argue that probably a lot of you in the room are technology companies. And now you're struggling with how do I become a risk management company? And you have to take a very different approach to it. So there's 4 pillars we service. We do data center, we do security, we do managed services, and then we do data analytics. So those are kind of the 4 pillars of what the company's built on.
That's fantastic. And I've had a chance to talk to you and meet your CFO and a couple others in the organization. And you guys have a fantastic MSP out in Boston, and I'm really excited to continue to work with you. So let's talk about this. You guys made a decision a while back. You had sort of a strategic decision around your security business. There's a couple things. One, building it around a specific framework, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you had another one where you said, like, at some point, you really got to, again, think about the focus. Like, how far are we going to go? Like, how much do we deliver? Why don't you talk about that decision that you made way back when?
Yeah, so we're a technology company, right? So I would kind of bust people in an organization. I'd say, our approach to security is, would you like fries with that? Right? So we would sell an array and we'd say, would you like data encryption at rest? We would sell, a firewall. Would you like encrypted VPN remote access? Right? So we never really took the approach of delivering security first. It was always the add-on, right? So, again, do you want fries with that? Right? So when we kind of took a look at it from the framework perspective and said, if we're going to lead with security and we're going to lead with compliance, we really have to be comprehensive. And I'm a big analogy guy, as you can't tell yet. So I'll give you what I thought here. If you went to a general contractor to build your house, okay, somebody talked about this earlier too, right?
Yep.
Little different spin on it.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to do everything for you, but I don't do electrical. I'm going to build your whole house, but you got to go find your own electrician. You'd probably go find a different GC. So when we looked at it from that perspective, we said, we're a technology company. We got to kind of create a boundary of what we can do. But on the same token, I can't leave the customer hanging and go, well, I'm going to get you this far, but I can't help you. So pick it up from there, right? So again, back to the house. I'll get the whole house for you, but you got to go find an electrician. That's not a lot of value proposition. So I think what we're building off of is the conversation you and I had where I talked about when you approach this, in my humble opinion, you really have to do it from a comprehensive perspective. Right. You can't do it just in a small piece because the value proposition for the client falls away very quickly.
That's fantastic. So you also decided early on that you were going to build your offering around a specific framework, NIST 800-171. You actually were one of the original sort of inspirations to be around our 4-box, which we'll bring back up here in a minute. But why was that important to choose that specific framework, and how has that helped focus over the past several years?
So let me go on record again. I am not a risk management expert, right? Yeah. So Dan can probably challenge me, who was just up here. He was excellent at it. But what I was looking at it, everything I kept going back to was everything fell back to 800-171, right? So if I looked at PCI compliance, they would say that the credit card data needs to be encrypted. Well, what does that mean? Is that a zip file with a password on it, right? Or is that 256-bit encryption? I don't know. But it would say, follow 800-171 for best encryption practices. And so if I looked at HIPAA, if I looked at PCI, the difference in the law was HIPAA might have said you need patient cradle to grave, lifetime patient storing of the record, and the record needed to be encrypted. The PCI might have said you need 18 months of logs on hand encrypted. But the encryption mechanisms were exactly the same. It was just the length of holding the data was really what the difference was. So we felt that if we built on 800-171, we could really go in any direction that the industry went. And Dan referred to that as crosstalk. I never heard of it that way, but it makes a lot of sense. So what we see is that across all of these standards, there's competing controls. But if you pick one control and you take care of it in HIPAA, then as an example, if you're healthcare that takes credit card, you'll find that you probably took care of that for the PCI requirement as well. So we felt 800-171 as the foundation was going to let us go in any direction that the pen being mightier than the sword and legislation came out.
That's great. What are the things that you guys have been paying attention to over the last year or so at Focus? I mean, obviously there's a lot of things changing in IT and a lot of things changing in risk and compliance. And so what are the things that you're really sort of keeping your eye on?
I think we've always been customer led, right? You're only going to be able to sell or provide what your customers need. So I think really the perspective of following what the clients are seeing out there. So I would say first and foremost, just meeting with a lot of clients and really finding out what they're struggling with from a compliance perspective, what am I really paying attention to going on in the industry? And I think Alex said it the other day, like, don't worry about CMMC, worry about 800-171. But we being in Massachusetts, we have Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, some of the biggest defense contractors. And I'm keeping my eye really close on CMMC. I believe, that is going to get into the hands of Homeland Security. And I think you're going to see a lot of government and state regulations start to fall back to CMMC.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about your sort of go-to-market. And when you're talking to a customer, who are you talking to at a business when you go in there? Who's that person that says, like, when you've got the right person at the table, this is going to be a good conversation?
So this has been a huge challenge, all right? Because our sales reps have sold technology and they're good at it. They're excellent at it, way better than me at it, right? But the reality of the situation is the buyer or the person who cares about compliance isn't the IT guy. IT actually stinks at compliance. We did as an organization, still do. We have a lot of room to improve. Talk about that in a minute. But I try to find out if it's a small customer that's not industry regulated, who handles your insurance policy, not your cyber insurance policy. Who handles your insurance policy? Who handles your HR? Because HR's only use in life, as much as, this will be sarcastic, but as much as they'll try to spend it, it's there for the employees. It's not there for the employees. It's there to prevent risk in the organization, right? I'm going to make you go through workplace harassment training because I don't want my company sued for workplace harassment. So everybody up here has told you cybersecurity is a risk. It's an insurance. You got to find out who in the organization really cares about risk. And in, a bank that's industry regulated, they're going to have a formal risk group. So that's the group you want to get to. But a small business, it's probably the owner of the company, honestly, or maybe it's the controller who's also handling HR, or the CFO who's actually handling HR. So, when we're trying to talk about security and drive security in the organization, the buyer is very much whoever's in charge of risk. It's not the IT. And that's who's going to care about it. And IT is actually going to push back on it because it's more work for them.
That's fantastic. All right. So we're going to bring back our favorite slide, which I heard several folks shared where they sort of point themselves to. You were one of the guys that sort of saw an early version of this. And one of the first things that I think you said to us was, you know what? I love this because it's just really important that MSPs build their offering around a safeguarded framework. Can you talk about that? Why do you feel like that? And just some input for the team here.
Well, at the risk of repeating what Dan said, I think you need a guiding light. You need a North Star. You need to know where you're going. And that's what these frameworks give you, is they give you where you should be going and where you should be focusing your time. We are very horizontal. We have every vertical you could name. I have a customer in that vertical, right? So I don't care if it's retail, K through 12, higher ed, manufacturing, blah, blah, blah. So I put us in the broad compliance area. So really just looking at compliance as a whole and how it's affecting every organization that's out there, rather than building something that was a specific offering. Now, that said, I am, as I mentioned, keeping my eye on CMMC. So, I think down the road, we might find ourselves doing a little more in the defense industrial base. Mm-hmm. But right now, every one of my clients needs some level of compliance. But to echo back, the framework is your guiding light that gets you to go in the direction you need to go.
That's fantastic.
It's a roadmap.
That's great. All right, back on the go-to-market, because that's what day 2 is all about. I want to share one of your slides. And, I thought this was pretty intriguing because you were talking about when you go into a partner, you're asking them, where they sort of are on their IT maturity. And you talked about a sort of a 6-step program. And again, it depends on who you are talking to there, but why don't you talk a little bit about sort of your go-to-market and how you talk to folks?
So a few things. And I took a lot of notes from what people have been saying prior to me. I warned him I can talk and I can go off topic. So he's got to reel me in.
Yeah.
So one thing was, people said, I think this is really important. Alex said, and others, it says, don't name products, don't name technologies. I absolutely agree with that, until it's a competitive advantage. All right. So if you remember during the .com boom, when PetSmart and all these dot bubbles that popped were coming out, they all had the logos at the bottom of the commercial ads that said powered by Cisco. And why? Cisco Systems was the leader in networking. It was credibility that was brought with that. So we developed a program called IT Secure Manage. And any offering from an MSP perspective, well, that's a good one too, right? So from an MSSP perspective, so managed security provider, falls under our IT Secure Manage. So we have legacy offerings that don't meet compliance and they're not very security because they were built 10 years ago, right? So anything we're building now, we're building under the brand of IT Secure Manage. And in the case of this example, you can notice in the bottom, I have it powered by Fortinet because I want the credibility of Fortinet behind me. I'm not using white boxes. I'm not trying to build my own stuff. I've got a, Gartner Magic Quadrant leader. So when I try to sell to the customer or we try to sell to the customer, it brings a lot of credibility. Really, the regulatory bodies part of this slide just talks to what I said. Everything comes back to NIST. So if you've got a good foundation on NIST, you're in a pretty good shape from that perspective. What we wanted to say to the client is, we are going to take the burden of compliance off of you if you buy the service from us. Now, you have to remember, and this is really key, it's in the confines of the service. And AWS does a phenomenal job with this. If you've followed Amazon at all, they call it the shared responsibility model. I cannot offer you compliance. It's much bigger than what I can offer as an organization. But what I can offer you is any pieces that you consume of this service will stand up against an audit. So change control, log retention, anything that goes into that, right? The second thing was we grabbed a select group of engineers, and to be perfectly honest, they weren't our most talented technical engineers. They were people that I saw great organizational skills. They were excellent at following process. So the first thing we did was we ripped them out and we sent them through compliance training. And these people think compliance first, right? So I was an engineer, so I'm not being hypocritical to it. Problem with the machine, I'll show my age. I telnet it in, I fixed it, and I left, right? The reality of the situation is you can't do that in a regular, you've got to grant access. You have to document access. You have to have change control. You have to know why I went in there. I have to have an artifact. So an audit trail that says, this is what the problem was. This is why we went in. This is what we made the change to. It's got to be completely documented. It's got to be vetted. It's got to be verified. So it was really a massive cultural change to the organization. And it's why we're doing it the way we were. I couldn't try to take this, in my humble opinion, and go, let's take all our managed services and immediately apply compliance capability to it. It was impossible. So we took what we thought were a couple hot ones to sell. We packaged them. We went about them completely different. And that team is actually isolated from the legacy team, not from a team corporate building, but as far as operating it, the person who's operating our legacy environment doesn't even have authorization to go into the new environment because they don't have the compliance training and the control that allows them to go into that.
That's great. The other thing I have in my notes here, I remember the conversation about, again, back to the who are you talking to in the organization? And you said it's got to be the risk management department, right? Because if they have one, because it's just the IT folks that are handling it. They just don't have the capabilities, right? Or they don't understand the needs like risk management does.
Show of hands, right? You guys are managing engineers. How many like doing documentation? Honestly. Well, compliance is all policy, process, procedure, and documentation.
Yeah.
Engineers don't like that. So I go into banks that have formal risk management groups, and their frustration is the IT department. First is they can't talk their language. So in fairness to the engineers, they don't even know what the hell these people are asking for, right? And then secondly, the audit team gets frustrated because, well, you're not giving me what we want. And the IT team gets frustrated because, all they're asking me for is reports and documentation. That's not what they do. They're engineers. So we saw the opportunity to go in and say, listen, I'm going to take that compliance burden off of not only the risk group, but I'm going to take it off of the engineers. And let me tell you, they welcome us with open arms.
That's great. Fantastic. I think this is one of the other slides that you shared with me. And this is really just talking about, again, what you're delivering to your customers. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if you take away sort of the value proposition and, dumb it down, right? So in this particular offering, and we have multiple offerings, but in this particular offering, we're offering a turnkey network infrastructure. So, technology part is really easy, guys. I mean, can you guys install firewalls and APs, switches? Yes, we're focused technology. That's easy. But what we're offering customers is a turnkey network infrastructure. We followed the cloud. A lot of our customers like the cloud. They like for paying for what they're using, right? So we put in a flexible consumption model, just like the cloud, where they have the ability to scale up and scale down, right? They're all 3-year contracts, and this is a good sales thing, but it's also good for the client, is we do a wipe the floor every 3 years on the refresh of the contract. Now that falls back to compliance, because compliance says you can't run anything that's end of life or end of support. So the value proposition we have to the client is you always have the latest and greatest, and it's always not end of life and not end of support. So when they re-up their contract, we wipe the floor. In this particular case, it's Fortinet. We'll go to whatever the next gen firewall is. We'll go to whatever the next gen APs are, and we'll go to whatever the next gen switches are. And those are the only components in this specific offering. It's just that.
That's fantastic.
And lastly, number 4, it's compliance ready. So if an auditor comes in and says, well, show me your firewall logs. Yeah, they are.
Got it. Great. Before we go to the next slide, I want to take some questions in a minute, but talk a little bit about the rest of your go-to-market. You guys have a sales team, right? You're a sizable organization.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the people who don't.
Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about that team? Who are the individuals, what types of personalities are on that team? Who are you hiring to work in sales? That seemed to always be the challenges. Very few former MSP sales folks were out and available. So you were hiring folks from different industries to sort of come in and be sales. And I'm just curious of what Focus had done to build their team.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not our VP of sales, but with that being said, it is different. I mean, we're 25 years old, right? Yeah. We had guys and gals who were making a tremendous amount of money, selling storage systems and things along those ways. So I think when we started to convert the business out of a hardware business over to an MSP, we realized that, first of all, the compensation models didn't fix. These guys love selling $1 million deals and getting large commission checks versus going out and signing, $14,000 a month reoccurring and getting drip fed, right? So we went out and purposely hired a team that could talk more around the MSP aspect. Same thing as we started to build more professional services. We look for people with professional services backgrounds, not hardware technology sales. Now, some had the ability to adapt and cross, there's no question about it, but it was definitely a different skill set. In compliance, I would argue, we're looking for people with MSP experience, but we're also looking for people with business intelligence, because it's much more of a business conversation than a technology conversation.
Sure. And how often do you and maybe some of the other executives, how often are you involved in the actual sales process?
Often.
Yeah.
Often. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm involved in a lot of pre-sales opportunities myself personally. You mentioned I was a CTO, correction. I'm CSO. The CTO, Larry Vino, he's on a lot of calls. It's a nomenclature in any industry. The best sales rep in the company is your CEO. He's got to sell the investors.
Sure.
So we use the whole executive team.
That's great. Awesome. Before we jump to sort of the segment that Bill plays in frequently, any questions for Bill to this point? Can open it up to the room.
Bill, when you said that you took a group of folks and you trained them in compliance, can you expand on what that means? Was there a specific framework, a specific training package, or did you make it up internally?
We made it up internally, and it was a lot of just basic YouTube videos that would find stuff around compliance. The other thing we had to do was we had to document formal training on specific products and the technology from the expertise. So as an example, in this Fortinet offering, we set the bar that for you to touch this, you needed to be, I forget their exact acronym, but you needed to be at least a level 5 engineer or you couldn't be part of this. So There was credibility. So if an auditor came back and said, who's operating this environment from a technical perspective, there was that. And then these people understood change control. So, one of the videos was just, what does change control mean? How do you document that and things along those lines? So it was very much homegrown.
Any other questions for Bill?
Well, it hasn't, right? It has to be part of it. And that's where I said you have to be comprehensive, right? So I'm going to try to simplify it, right? Let's just use an example. So one of the controls is access control. Who has access to your system? Okay, so we're putting a firewall in there that has VPN capability. Okay, so the access control is, how do they access through the VPN? So who manages that? How's that documented and how is that controlled? So, no, and because that feature or capability is there, then we have to take responsibility for that. So that's where it's got to be comprehensive. And that's why I'm saying you can't just go in there and say, well, I'll get you this far, but then I don't worry about who's coming in remotely. You've got to worry about who's coming in. Now, if they're coming in a way that is not part of the offering, so let's take that as a great example. This is entry into your corporate environment, but they are using Salesforce. Their compliance says they have to control access to Salesforce, not my boundary. So for the organization to be compliant, they need to document how they distribute Salesforce. In this particular case, maybe as another example, how do they get to Office 365? So what are they doing for multi-factor 365? Who is the admin? How are they controlling all of that? That's part of the access control boundary of compliance. That is not my boundary in this offering. Okay. But a remote user coming in from home over the VPN, then that's going to be in my boundary and I have to worry about that.
Anyone else?
Makes sense. I feel like I'm lecturing. I'm not trying to lecture.
Awesome. All right. We'll leave some more time for some questions here in a few. Let's spend a minute talking about a segment that, and I think it was really healthcare that, you mentioned, Bill, that you guys sort of are a bit spread out, but if you look at your client base right now, you have a large presence in sort of the legal healthcare space, finance. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what that segment looks like and how you deliver the services to that segment, any different than maybe any of your other segments? And I expect the answer is not very different, right? I mean, there's a lot of similarities. Yeah.
I mean, there is a lot of similarities, but if you look at like healthcare as a pretty, again, unless you're working for one of the bigger clinics, right, you're going to find that they subbed out their electronic records management to somebody else. So as an example, one of our customers, I'll mention them by name, is eClinicalWorks, right? So eClinicalWorks is a SaaS application that is given to hospitals. It's an alternative to Epic. It's a competitor to Epic, right? So if you're working with eClinicalWorks that's holding all of this data, then that's a completely different story than the doctor's office that's accessing eClinicalWorks, right? Because at that point, the doctor's office might not actually be carrying any of the PII. It's up in eClinicalWorks. They're not controlling or encrypting any of the data in that particular area. So those ones are kind of easy usually, to be honest, right? The law firms are a little bit different. Although they do use record management applications, we do find that a lot of the law firms are holding their own data. They've got it somewhere in the environment, whether it's case information or something else. So those ones, we're going to do a lot more around, data governance and restriction controls and looking at that a lot deeper into the client. Now, that may not be baked into like the turnkey offering, but to what Dan was saying, that is part of our risk review with the client is how are you protecting that data and what are you doing with that data? And then finance is regulated pretty heavily. So that's really just, and usually again, in most financial firms, they already have a mature risk working group. So you're just kind of trying to figure out what value you can bring to them. And it's usually not around policy, process, and procedure, because they have a lot of that. It's how does your offering dovetail into feeding what they already have in place? I mean, the banking, credit card industry, local regional banks, that is so regulated. It's like the insurance industry. You're going to find they have a risk working group, committee, or department, and you just got to kind of figure out how you dovetail in.
That's great. And then what are some of the ways that the team sort of stays up to date on the changes in cybersecurity? And obviously the regulations and legal and healthcare and finance are changing pretty much by the minute. So how are you guys keeping up with all the changes?
You know, honestly, from a leadership perspective, it's just stuff like this, right? Yeah. It's meeting guys like Dan. I mean, you know, again, I came right up and said, our company is focused technology. We're a technology company. We're not risk management, right? So, and I'm certainly not an attorney. So for all the laws and legislation that passed, I don't understand half the stuff I read, right? But that being said, yeah, it's seminars, it's webinars, it's meeting with your clients on a regular basis. And how are you interpreting this law? How is this going to affect you? As for the team, it's more, because again, we're a technology company, it's more technical based. It's just staying on top of the latest trends, you know, vendor training, manufacturer training, trade rags, internal training. So it's all of the above, but I mean, it's a wave. I'm not going to pretend that, you know, oh, if you do this one thing, you'll be on top of it all.
Go to this one website, right?
Yeah, it's coming at you from every different direction. I will say it's divide and conquer. Like my engineers aren't worrying about the same stuff that, say, I'm worrying about, and my CFO is not worrying about the stuff that so I think it is a divide and conquer mentality, no question about it. You can't fall on one person.
Awesome. All right. So one of my favorite pieces, we've asked a couple of the different presenters this question, and I think you had one of the best responses. So we're asking you.
I don't know if I remember it.
Ask you what's an unpopular opinion that you might have around IT? I think it had something to do with cloud first.
Yeah, cloud first, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that's definitely a very unpopular opinion. You know, I've been in this industry for almost 30 years, and, you know, Gartner calls it the hype cycle, right? It's, you know, a new technology comes out, it's hyped, right? And then it falls down to what is it really capable of doing? Okay, so you know, if you look at something that's at the absolute top of the hype cycle right now, it's ChatGPT, right? It's going to solve all the world's problems, right? But is it? I don't know. So it's going to come down to the reality of what it can really do and what it can be used for. Now that'll morph and change. I mean, I'm not stupid from that perspective, but Gartner calls it that. So I just find it absolutely hilarious that I've watched all these organizations for years, even despite the fact that we did technology surveys that said, if you stay in your data center, it's still going to be less expensive than going to the hyperscalers. There was just this mentality that everything had to be in the cloud. And there was actually a term, cloud first. We're cloud first. We're cloud first. And now what I'm seeing is the exact opposite. I'm seeing people coming out of the cloud saying, oh my God, we never realized it was going to cost this much. This is crazy. My Amazon bill is now approaching $150,000 a month. I just never seen that coming. So I would say that's probably one of the most unpopular opinions I see, that everything needs to be in the cloud. Now, the cloud has its space. I am absolutely a proponent of the cloud, so I'm not anti-cloud. Sure. But I think you have to take a look at it. And, you know, even going back 10 years ago, Gartner said that they predicted the future would be hybrid, and I don't see anything changing. I really don't. You know, one thought on that, right? Netflix famously had a call with the analyst, the financial analyst, and it was their CFO. And, you know, I'm not being quoted here, but basically what came out of it is, you know, we've lowered our operational costs to the point that we could get it as low as we possibly could. We got to figure out how we're going to lower this AWS charge, right? And they went under a massive initiative to rewrite their software from the ground up so that they could move to any single cloud provider, right? So that they could start bidding AWS against Azure, against Google, right? Who's going to give us the best deal? The other big thing is, you know, in that case study, I find that hilarious. Be careful of who you get in bed with, right? Who is one of Netflix's top competitors? Amazon Prime. What incentives do they have to give you a good contract? If anything, they want to drive your price up, right? They want to beat you on, they want you to be a customer on this hand, but they're trying to kill you on the other hand, right? So I just think cloud first is just not very wise. Again, I think there's a place for cloud and a lot of applications belong in the cloud. I think something like collaboration or 365, that's an absolute no-brainer. But some stuff really does need to still be looked.
Got it. That's great. So you sat in the room for the last couple of days. You were a participant. You had an opportunity to speak. Is there anything any sort of captivating themes, and I know you had a bunch of them, you got tons of notes, but anything that you haven't shared to this point with the group that you'd like to about just sort of where your mind's at and things that you're thinking about that are really important to the MSP and what could be valuable to them?
Well, one theme I heard was business outcomes, right? I think that's really important. I know that's a cliche, right? Business outcomes, right? But it really is. I think the other thing we have to remember is that, our industry is absolutely a service industry, right? So how, in that service, I'm not saying is personnel, customer service, answering the phone. It's, you are providing a service, right? You're providing a managed service. It's right in the description. So you grab that ass and really making sure that, the service as a whole is sticky, right? So I'm going to be selfish here, right? I don't want to lose clients. So I want it to be sticky. I want it to be my brand and my service. So echoing what Alex said, I don't want an invoice that says you've got a Fortinet firewall, even though my marketing tells you do. I need to be able to flip vendors. So as an example, we're actually new to Enable. We're coming off of our Continuum, ConnectWise Continuum. So I don't want to have to go back and rewrite contracts that, had Continuum called out in them when I decided that Enable was better for my business, right? That wasn't a silo decision. I'm just kind of talking that through. So I think, remember that you're in a service industry and you need to really continue to drill down to the customers is what's providing value and service. I've been doing this a while. When we used to be called a VAR, it was the V was a value-added reseller. So I always would challenge people as to, what is the value we're adding? And what was funny was if you went to 3 different clients, you'd get 3 different value propositions. Well, you guys do this for us. That's awesome. And it's the same exact thing we're doing. It's just one customer found value in one area where another customer found value in another area. So, when I listen to Alex, I listen to Dan helping clients with compliance. I listen to, the theme is just make sure that you really understand what is that end business outcome of that service that you're delivering. And I would always challenge you to sit in the chair of the customer and say, would you buy it?
Great advice. All right. Well, Bill, thank you very, very much. This was a real honor to have you up here. And it's amazing to have someone that is a brand new customer, want to be part of this and want to be part of this whole group and share their opinions and feedback and everything that's happened. It's been really great to have you here. Everybody, please give Bill a round of applause.
Very good. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to leave with the privilege is mine. I've met so many people here and I've learned a lot. I think the presenters, and like I said, it was really good. The guys from the Fortis team, phenomenal. So privilege is mine. So thank you for having me.